He was 52 years old when he finally decided he couldn't keep living the way he had been. For most of his life, he had worked jobs that barely paid the bills, sometimes as a teacher, other times as a lecturer or freelance writer. Nothing he did felt like it would ever lead to financial security, let alone extraordinary wealth. He wasn't born into privilege, had no connections in high finance, and no one would have called him a business genius. But what he had, what he never gave up, was a mind that refused to go quiet, even when the world had given up listening. Ray Kroc wasn't the founder of McDonald's. That credit goes to the McDonald brothers, Richard and Maurice. But if the story ended there, you would have never heard of him. Ray was a struggling milkshake machine salesman, crisscrossing the country trying to get restaurants to buy mixers they didn't really need. At 52, he was well past the age where most people imagine starting over. But then came a phone call, one of those seemingly ordinary moments that hides the power to change everything. A small restaurant in San Bernardino had ordered several milkshake machines. That alone caught his attention. Who in their right mind needed that many mixers? Curiosity got the better of him. He drove out to California, walked into the small drive-in, and stood there watching in quiet astonishment. The system was unlike anything he'd seen. Fast, efficient, clean. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was an operation that looked like it had been engineered. People lined up, got their food in minutes, and left smiling. Ray saw what others had missed. Not just a restaurant, but a revolution. While others were focused on burgers and fries, he saw scale, systems, consistency. He didn't want to own one restaurant. He wanted to turn it into the most recognizable brand in the world. But convincing the McDonald brothers was another matter. They weren't interested in growing too fast. They wanted to maintain quality, stay in control. Ray had a different vision, bigger, bolder, one that would demand everything he had and more. Over the next years, he would fight harder than he ever had in his life. He mortgaged his home to raise money. He pushed himself into meetings he wasn't invited to. He networked, pitched, and failed more times than most people would endure in a lifetime. He wasn't charming. He wasn't universally liked. But he was relentless. Every setback only sharpened his resolve. He didn't care if he was 53, 55, or 58. He had seen something the world hadn't, and he wasn't going to die with that vision buried in his mind. Eventually, Ray Kroc wrested control of the brand, and what followed was nothing short of staggering. He institutionalized systems that ensured every McDonald's operated the same way, anywhere, anytime. He revolutionized franchising, real estate, and scale. By the time he was in his 60s, McDonald's had exploded into a global empire, transforming not just the food industry but the very nature of fast food culture across the world. And Ray Kroc became a billionaire, not because he had a tech startup or a lucky break, but because he refused to believe the lie that age sets a limit on vision. What makes Ray's story so powerful isn't just that he succeeded late. It's that he didn't allow the quiet years to erase his fire. Most people imagine their 50s as a time to wind down, to settle into whatever life has become. Ray did the opposite. He leaned into uncertainty. He bet on something no one else saw. He risked more at 52 than many people dared to risk at 22. And the truth is, he wasn't special, not in the traditional sense. He didn't have genius IQ or elite access. What he had was obsession, vision, a willingness to endure being misunderstood and underestimated. He built an empire on burgers, but what he really sold was belief. Belief that consistency could win in a world that craved novelty. Belief that systems could matter more than luck. Belief that a man in his 50s, broken by the decades, could still rise and shape the world in his image. The billions came later. But the moment of real wealth began when he walked into that San Bernardino restaurant and saw more than anyone else could. Most people look for certainty before they act. Ray Kroc acted before he had certainty. He walked forward in fog, again and again. He didn't wait to be invited. He carved his own seat at the table. He failed spectacularly, pushed past humiliation, and kept moving. His story isn't just about wealth, It's about reinvention, about the unkillable nature of will. He didn't do it when he was young. He did it when most people feel time is slipping away. And maybe that's the real secret. Success doesn't have an expiration date. It only has a threshold, the moment when you finally decide to stop waiting and start moving. Ray Kroc crossed that line at 52. And the world would never eat the same again. She wasn't supposed to succeed, not anymore. Not after everything. Not after the divorce, the years of financial instability, the countless business plans that fell apart before they even started. Most people who knew her thought she had simply run out of time. That her best ideas, if she'd ever had them, had long since faded into the rearview mirror of her life. But Diane Hendricks wasn't wired like most people. She didn't measure her worth by her age, or her failures, or the silence that had followed her attempts to build something meaningful. What she had was hunger. Not the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that settles in your bones and doesn't leave. In her early years, Diane worked as a waitress, took jobs wherever she could, and tried to hold together a life that seemed to be breaking apart faster than she could patch it. She married young, had a child, and was widowed just as young. There was no safety net waiting, no inheritance, no shortcut. She lived through moments where survival felt like success. But even in those darkest stretches, something inside her refused to lie down. She believed quietly, stubbornly, that she could still build something extraordinary. She just didn't know what yet. It wasn't until she was in her 50s that things began to shift. Most people her age were winding down, talking about pensions, security, and coasting into retirement. Diane was doing the opposite. She partnered with Ken Hendricks, a roofer who shared her relentless drive and unshakable vision. Together, they founded ABC Supply in 1982, a wholesale distributor of roofing, siding, and windows. Not glamorous, not headline-worthy, but real, tangible, scalable. She didn't need the world to understand it. She just needed to make it work. ABC Supply didn't grow because Diane knew all the answers. It grew because she refused to stop asking better questions. She obsessed. Over customer service, logistics, pricing models. Every inch of the business mattered to her. She wasn't managing a company. She was crafting a system, brick by brick, that would outlive any single market trend. And when Ken passed away in 2007, she could have stepped away, let the legacy stand. But she didn't. She doubled down. She took over as sole owner and steered the company into even more aggressive expansion. Most people look at billionaires and assume they were always destined, that it was clear from the beginning who would rise and who wouldn't. Diane's path was anything but clear. There were no guarantees, no safety margins, no preordained roadmap. Every dollar earned was the result of thousands of invisible decisions, made when no one was watching, when the stakes were highest, and when the pressure to quit was strongest. She carried the weight of an empire on her shoulders and never flinched. What's astonishing about Diane isn't just her wealth, it's how she built it. In a male-dominated industry, starting late, defying every conventional narrative. She didn't let the statistics define her. She redefined them. And the deeper truth behind her success is one that almost no one wants to admit. Sometimes you do your best work after the storm has already hit. Not before, not during, after. When the pieces are scattered. When the world tells you you've had your chance. That's when Diane got to work. She knew the power of resilience not as a concept but as a daily necessity. Her decisions weren't made from a place of ease but of urgency. She didn't need the spotlight, she needed results. And so she built. Quietly, relentlessly, with a kind of industrial elegance that most people overlook because it isn't loud or flashy. But that's the thing about real power. It doesn't have to announce itself. It just moves, expands, endures. By the time she reached her late 60s, Diane Hendricks was a billionaire, the richest self-made woman in America. Not because she chased wealth for its own sake, but because she refused to accept the story others tried to write for her. They said she was too late, too old, too inexperienced. She listened, then did the opposite. Because deep down she knew that the clock doesn't get to decide when you're done. You do. The story of Diane Hendricks is not just about success. It's about reclamation, of identity, of agency, of possibility. It's a reminder that the most powerful moves often come after the curtain has already dropped, when everyone else has stopped watching. She built her empire from the scaffolding of loss and turned a regional operation into a national force. And she did it without waiting for permission. Her story is a quiet thunder that rolls through every person who has ever wondered if it's too late. Because what Diane proved, day after day, deal after deal, is that timing is a myth. There is only movement or stillness. And she chose to move. He had built a reputation, then lost it. He had built wealth, then watched it slip through his hands. And then, after most would have given up and faded into quiet obscurity, he started again. Not at 30, not at 40, but at 56. That was the age when the world stopped seeing him as someone on the rise and started quietly treating him like someone whose best days were behind him. But Colonel Harlan Sanders never accepted that script, because he wasn't chasing youth or even redemption. He was chasing something that had been inside him his entire life, a fire that time couldn't smother. He'd worn more job titles than most men could name: steamboat pilot, railroad fireman, insurance salesman, country lawyer, service station operator, restaurant cook. Over and over he had built small foundations, only to watch them collapse. He knew failure intimately. But what made Sanders different wasn't how many times he failed. It was how utterly uninterested he was in staying down. At a gas station in Corbin, Kentucky, he began frying chicken for weary travelers, using a recipe he had spent years perfecting: pressure fried, seasoned with a secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. People didn't just like it, they came back for it. They told their friends. It wasn't fast food as the world knew it. It was food that felt like it came from somewhere deeper, something that reminded them of home. Word spread, and for a time the restaurant thrived. But then came the highway rerouting. Traffic dried up, customers disappeared, and Sanders, now in his 60s, was left with a failing business and a $105 monthly Social Security check. He could have accepted it. Could have sat in the shadows and told stories about the good years, but that wasn't in him. Instead, he packed up his car and began traveling the country with a pressure cooker and a dream. He would walk into restaurants, cook chicken in their kitchens, and if the owners liked it, he'd offer them a franchise deal. He slept in his car. He was rejected over 1,000 times. People laughed at the idea. A man in his 60s, in a white suit, selling fried chicken from the trunk of his car. It sounded like a joke, but Sanders didn't care. Because what he knew, what no rejection could shake, was that his product was excellent. He didn't need validation. He needed opportunity. And he would knock on every door in America if he had to. Slowly, the tide began to shift. One restaurant agreed, then another. Word began to spread. This wasn't just chicken, it was a brand, a taste that stood for something. And by the time the momentum really took off, Sanders wasn't a young entrepreneur riding a tech boom. He was an old man with a white goatee and a stubborn will, finally being seen for the empire he had envisioned decades earlier. Kentucky Fried Chicken exploded in growth. His image became iconic: the string tie, the white suit, the calm southern drawl. But behind that image was a man who had spent nearly a lifetime being ignored, underestimated, and forgotten. And yet, he never let bitterness replace vision. Even in the shadows, even in the silence, he kept building. Not because he was chasing fame or money, but because he still believed that the thing he had created deserved to be known. The truth about Sanders is this: he didn't find success because he waited for the perfect moment. He found it because he kept showing up long after the world told him to stop. He turned chicken into a global brand, and himself into a symbol, not of fast food, but of late-blooming possibility. He was 65 when he began to franchise in earnest. He was 73 when he sold his company for millions. But none of it came quickly. None of it came easy. He could have drowned in resentment. Could have told himself that his time had passed. But he didn't. He turned failure into fuel. He turned rejection into rehearsal. Every time someone slammed a door in his face, he just kept walking. And maybe the most powerful part of his story is this: he never saw his age as a disadvantage. In fact, he carried himself with the kind of calm clarity that only age can give. He knew who he was, he knew what he had, and he knew it was worth sharing, so he kept going. Through humiliation, through poverty, through thousands of miles driven, in a beat-up car with nothing but a recipe and resolve. Because that's what it takes sometimes. Not talent, not connections, just the refusal to quit. The ability to look at a broken path and say, I'm still walking. That's what built KFC. Not the seasoning, not the pressure cooker, but the unbreakable will of a man who didn't believe in giving up. He didn't change the world in his youth. He did it with tired hands, a weathered heart, and a spirit that refused to surrender. And in doing so, he showed us something most people never learn. The end of the road is often just the beginning, if you have the courage to keep walking. What all these stories have in common is simple. Age doesn't have the final say. In fact, many of these individuals found their greatest success later in life, not despite their age, but because of it. They had the wisdom, the resilience, and the belief that they could still achieve greatness. They showed us that the journey doesn't stop at 50. It can be just the beginning of something extraordinary. If you're watching this and thinking that it's too late for you, remember? These stories prove otherwise. It's never too late to change your life, to reinvent yourself, or to reach for something bigger than you ever imagined. So, what's stopping you? If you found this video inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of perseverance and success. And leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Which of these incredible journeys resonated with you the most? Or do you have your own story of starting anew later in life? We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter where you are in life, it's still possible to achieve your dreams.